One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Y'all, I'm so excited about today because I have an extra special guest on the show. I know I haven't been doing a ton of interviews lately, but I don't know, I just got the itch after so many episodes of going solo that I wanted to share with you today my interview with Dr. Mark T. Wade. Now, if you have participated in any virtual summits in the last 12 months, then there is a good chance you're going to get so much value out of this episode. If you have never participated in a virtual summit, you're going to get even more value out of this episode because Mark is the founder of Virtual Summit Software and the One Day Summit. And he is going to share so many nuggets of information that I really want you to consider. Like if you are someone who you've put your stake in the ground and you've said, this is who I am, this is the type of podcast I want to have if you have not launched. If you have launched, then you already know. You've already put that stake in the ground and you're like, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, this is what my podcast teaches, or this is how I inform my audience, like all the things. You know what you are about. If you know all of those things, then I'm going to challenge you. I want you to consider thinking about a virtual summit. So I'm not going to spoil anything else. We're just going to get right to it. Let's get into my interview with Dr. Mark T. Wade. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Because if you've been thinking about creating a podcast for a while, well, I'm so glad you found this show. Think of this as the shortcut / time-saving version of searching Google and YouTube for hours and hours trying to figure out the world of podcasting. Trust me, as a busy mama of 3, I get it. You don't have a lot of time to be spent or wasted, I should say, searching the web, trying to find all the right ideas and all the amazing things that are out there, and you just end up overwhelmed. Trust me, I've been there, done that, took home the souvenir. But this podcast is going to help you in practical ways because twice a week we'll be delivering episodes that are going to give you steps to help you create a podcast your audience can't wait to listen to. So let's get right to it, shall we? All right, Profit Podcast listeners, I'm so excited to introduce you today to our guest because if you've ever wanted to know about virtual summits, he is the master. So welcome to the show, Dr. Mark T. Wade.
Hello, hello, hello. Super stoked to be here. Excited to rock out today.
Yes. So we recently worked on a project together and it has everything to do with virtual summits. Now, my audience, they may have participated in some virtual summits, may know a little bit about it, but for the interest of you being new to the podcast, can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us what we need to know about virtual summits?
Absolutely. So as you said, Dr. Mark T. Wade, I'm a postural neurologist by trade. I have 2 doctorates and a couple dozen certifications in neurology, neuroscience, posture, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But with that being said, I started with a brick and mortar practice and moved into the online space thinking it was going to be pretty easy. Literally, as we've all found out, it's not easy, right? So I struggled, just like we all did until I heard my good buddy, Pat Flynn over at Smart Passive Income talking about this concept of a virtual summit. And essentially a virtual summit is solving a problem with a pre-made video, essentially with industry or niche experts over the course of a period of a set time frame. So what that actually means is your audience has a problem that they need solved. You then either interview or bring industry and niche experts to solve those problems. You record that either in a presentation or interview, and then you release it over a set period of days for free. So your audience gets this amazingly high value, great information for free from industry experts that normally they'd have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to be in touch with. So I tried to do that essentially, but at that time, this is like 8 years ago now. At that time, I didn't really have any kind of influence or connections, and I was only able to get 9 speakers essentially. And it's kind of embarrassing, but 2 of those were me and my partner. And instead of going back to the speakers who had already said yes and saying, I don't want to do this or I can't do this because we didn't get enough speakers, because I was kind of embarrassed to tell them that, I decided, you know what, I'm just going to be resourceful and we're going to make this happen. Right. We actually ran it as a 1-day summit, and at that time I was just trying to be resourceful. I didn't know I was kind of doing anything special at the time, but that 1-day summit went on to do about 5,000 leads and around $32,000, which was the first real success that I had in the online business. Now, the cool thing is that summit, the structure of that summit went on to become a certification, which became a multi-million-dollar certification. And then that online company became a multi-million-dollar company. And we did it all based off of summits. Like still to this day, we run 2 to 4 multi-day summits and 4 to 8 1-day summits every year in all of my companies. And then because we were running so many summits, I eventually had a team of 4 people working full time just on summits. And I got frustrated. I was like, why is this so difficult? Like you can do a podcast, you can do a webinar, you can do a course in relatively no time with no like tech background or coding skills. So then I said, well, there needs to be something for summits. So we built a software called Virtual Summit Software, which is now what I spend most of my time doing, is helping people go from unknown to influencers by getting their message out to the world through a collaborative marketing strategy.
That's so cool. So my first question is, you said you've been doing this for about 7-8 years. How has, take aside your own technology, how has just the popularity and the idea of a virtual summit changed from when you first started to where we are today?
Well, the interesting thing is I have a podcast as well called the Virtual Summit Podcast. And I totally geeked out. I geek out, I'm a nerd in general, right? You don't get two doctorates if you're not a nerd, but I geek out over Virtual Summit stuff. And on my podcast, I actually got to interview, her name's Milana Lashintz. And she was the founder, the creator, the first person who ever ran a virtual summit. So a
Wow.
multi-day summit. And so anyways, I got to go back all the way to the beginning when these transitioned from teleseminars to what was then called telesummits to now virtual summits and online summits. So
Okay.
it went from like unknown, and you had to literally either hire a web developer or have that skill yourself to be able to do it. Then WordPress came and made it a little bit easier. You still had to be savvy. But once that happened, more and more people were able to do it. So summits have always been one of the most powerful online marketing strategies. From the moment of their inception, still today, they are one of the most powerful online marketing strategies. And we can go into why if you want in a minute. But the only thing that has changed is ability to put on summits. So back then when Milana was doing it, like she had to hire a developer. She came up with the concept first off, but it took weeks and weeks and weeks of a developer working full time to build it out. Then with WordPress, my first summit, the one I just told you about, it's kind of embarrassing to say, but it took me about 100 hours back then. I was bootstrapping that company. So I was doing everything myself. I was wearing all of the hats.
Right.
And I spent 100 hours building it out, 7 different pieces of software, 26 plugins, all Frankenstein together. And it still looked like a third grader built it. But the fact of the matter is I could actually build it thanks to things like, WordPress, etc. So from that capability, more and more people started to do it. And then the successes became more and more. So then more people found out about it. Then when our software came on the market a couple years ago, it was the first software ever designed specifically for hosting a summit. So it took it from hundreds of hours with using things like WordPress to now you can have a summit up ready to run in a matter of hours. So because of that, popularity and desire is still there. It's just now there's capability. So we've seen a lot of summits now starting to happen.
Yeah, it's so crazy because I participated in this year alone, which I'm brand new to summits. I hadn't participated in them. I kind of knew what they were last year, but just in this year alone, I've been a part of 3 different summits, and it's so inspiring to see what you can do in, like you said, a short amount of time. But you just you want to talk about drinking, from a fire hose or however that saying is, it's like there's so many amazing speakers that you can have access to, and it's not limited on one person's perspective on like, this is the, for me, it's podcasting. Like if I were to do a summit all about podcasting, man, just reaching out to so many different experts and getting their different opinions is so valuable. So can you speak on that? Like, what do you look for in your summit presenters and the people that you like to work with?
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Well, I always start with the end in mind. Okay. And this is a common misconception or misstep is the speaker aspects. That's the sexy part. We want to jump in there and reach out to John Lee Dumas, Tony Robbins, Lewis Howes. We want to have this opportunity, and that is a great opportunity. I mean, the power of summits is not just, it is the ability to generate an engaged and qualified audience. Essentially, years and years and years of list building and tens of thousands of dollars can be done in a matter of days or day if you're doing like the one-day summit. So like that is right there is one of the first allures that brings people to it. But the other aspect is it immediately positions you as an authority in your niche or your topic, essentially. So like almost overnight, it seems you become like an industry or niche topic. And there's hundreds and hundreds of stories of people who've hosted a summit with, like quote unquote unknown to, as soon as they host the summit, they're now being asked to speak on physical stages and podcasts and other summits. So they become that authority. But then the great aspect is what you just brought up here is the ability to create strategic partnerships. So when you run a summit, there's two aspects of it that make it more powerful than almost any other kind of online strategy. And the fact is, one, you control the platform. Meaning, like if we're doing social media, like most of us can attest to this. Like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, even I could put $100 into Facebook ads and churn out 1,000 leads. It was the best thing ever. And then Facebook changed their algorithm, and all of a sudden, it's now like very difficult and more expensive to even in some niches and industries. For example, like in the healthcare space, they've actually turned off some things where you're not allowed, if you don't play by their rules, you don't get access to play on their platform. Well, with the summit, it's like your email list. You want to own your platform. You want to own that email list, because even if Facebook goes away tomorrow, which they're not, you still have that list and you can still generate a business or income or whatever. Now with the summit, it's the same thing. It's your platform. It's a way to generate a list, an audience, and you own it. Like they can't take that summit away from you, essentially. Now, additionally, is with the strategic partnerships, is this gives you an opportunity, because you have that platform, you now have something of value. Just like a podcast. When you have a podcast, you have a platform, something of value. It is beneficial for me to be interviewed by you because I get exposure to your audience. I get to give them some really cool information, and hopefully some of them think I'm okay. And they say, oh, like Mark's cool. And so that's a benefit. With a summit, it's like that on steroids as well, because you get to reach out to these influencers or these topic or micro influencers, whichever you're looking for, and you get to bring them onto your summit, and they want to be on it because you have a platform that allows them to get some exposure. So it's kind of like a trade. They've got knowledge and expertise.
Right.
You're creating an opportunity for them to give that knowledge and expertise in order for them to get some exposure to potentially new audiences as well. So when it comes to the speakers, we start with the end, and this is a long way of answering your question,
right.
but I like to break it down in the format. Like when it comes to getting speakers, I never start with the speakers first, because it's like anything else. If we build it because of something we think is cool or sexy or interesting, a lot of times we're missing, we could miss the target. We could build something that our audience is either not interested in or not looking for at the moment. So especially with today, like in this environment, attention span is decreasing rapidly. So people are getting bombarded with information and knowledge. So it's not a matter of having good information anymore. Now it's a matter of having good information, and the information is on point with what that person is looking for at that moment. So the best way we do this is starting with the end in mind. Where do you want to take this audience to after the summit? So your summit is not your monetization strategy, although it will generate income and profits and revenue. And it's what we call a self-liquidating offer, meaning because you don't have to pay for ads, you literally, or if you do pay for ads, it like pays for itself. So it's one of the only things you can do that generates income without you actually having to put income or money into it. But when we're thinking about where we want to take our new audience, is like, well, what's your next step? What's the customer journey? Do you have a course, a coaching program, a certification, and a live event? Like, what is it? Or maybe your strategy is not a monetization strategy at all. Maybe your strategy is you want to build the audience for your podcast, for example. So if let's use this example. If your goal is, I want to boost attention, subscribers, downloads, awareness of my podcast, that's the goal. Okay. So we're going to start with that. We're going to say, well, what problems, like your podcast is a solution. It's solving problems. It's either, bringing experts on to talk about different ideas, or it's giving your audience steps, like tactical steps to do something. So think about, what is one of the top problems that your audience has? Now, if you need to, you can write out 2 or 3 problems, because sometimes it's difficult to pick the top one, but pick one. That's what and we're going to, for the sake of this episode, and the fact we don't have like 5 hours for me to just blurb
Right.
on and on about summits. We're going to keep this to a 1-day summit, because a 1-day summit is the quickest and easiest way of doing a summit. Like if you're going to do a multi-day summit, 3 to 14 days, 20 to 80 speakers, you want to give yourself anywhere from 3 to 6 months minimum of time to prepare. And it's like a massive undertaking. Okay. So I never recommend anybody start off with a multi-day summit.
Okay.
I always recommend start off with a 1-day summit, because it's like it says, it's 1 day. Doesn't mean it's a full day in content. It just means your audience has 1 day to consume it. So remember, we're trying to overcome attention span. So you're giving your audience a solution to their problem in a defined amount of time, 1 day. We all have 1 day, essentially like tomorrow, to get the solution to the problem I'm suffering from today.
Right.
So with that being said, the 1-day summit is usually only 5 to maximum 15 speakers, with 10 being kind of the sweet spot. Okay. So much, and you could do a 1-day summit in about 60 days. So much, if you're taking longer than that, you're probably procrastinating. So much more consumable. So now we're going to take that one problem we were just talking about. Okay. Our audience has this problem. And again, the solution to that problem is like many of the solutions are going to come from our podcast. So the goal is we're going to eventually drive them there. So we take that problem, we go back out, and now I'm going to build out a 1-day summit around this problem. So like, give me one problem that your audience has, Crystal.
Oh my gosh. I feel like the biggest struggle I'm hearing the most about lately is about content. They are terrified that they're going to run out of content.
Perfect. Okay. This is a great example. And you actually had a very specific problem, and we could even niche it down a little bit more specific, but like, this is great, because a lot of times another mistake summit hosts will do is they'll take a topic or even something that they think, again, is either a hot topic or kind of sexy. And again, we could say like, oh, well, 2 years ago, crypto was really hot, right? Like it was sexy.
Right.
But the thing is, if your audience isn't looking, I got to make this point, because this is valid in all of your marketing today. And if we'll use like money as an example. So let's say you're going, well, my audience, my client, my audience, they needs to make more money, and I have a program that helps them build revenue or something like that. That's very true. Your audience probably does have the problem that they need more money. I mean, we all have that problem. We all want more money.
Right.
The problem is, what are they actively searching for? I'm not online searching for how to make more money. I'm online searching for how do I get my leads to convert, or how do I do Facebook marketing, or how do I set up a sales page? I have a specific problem that I'm searching for the answer to. And if you give me a broad topic like make more money, I will go, ooh, that's cool, but not right now. Again, we're ninjas at deflecting information and only looking for the information we need right now. So we're going to go with your problem, your example, that they need content. Okay. And we're going to actually take that problem and say, I'm afraid I'm a fear of running out of content. Okay. Or let's just even say like not being able to produce enough content.
There we go. Yeah.
So now when you market that, you actually brought it up in a way that's perfect. So there's 3 levels of marketing. You have extrinsic, which is like, what's the big problem that we talk about? That would be like money, for example, or content, like needing more content. Intrinsic, which is the deeper level, which is how do we feel? And that would be the fear, which is what you said, the fear of running out of content. That's really where we want to hone marketing into. And then at the bottom, it's philosophic. The last part of that is philosophic, like good versus evil. So you always want to focus your marketing more at a philosophic or intrinsic level to make it convert higher. That's just a ninja tip, something else right there for you.
Yeah, I love it.
Anyways, we're back to creating more content. So now that's our problem. We're going to pick for a 1-day summit. Let's just say we're going to pick 3, 4, 5 solutions. What are 3 different things? And I'll have you give me one thing that your audience would need to know to solve this problem of making more content.
They would need to know how to brainstorm ideas properly.
Cool. Do you have another one?
Oh gosh. Yeah. I have ask your audience.
And then
your audience. Let me see. Off the top of my head is constantly survey people in the industry.
Perfect. And I'll also add, just so I'm contributing as well, batching your product, like taking one stream of information like a summit, and then using that audio, using that video, okay. So we've got 4 different solutions now to this one problem. This now becomes your session. Okay. Oh my gosh, that was so easy. And it also tells you who your speaker is going to be. So I know this was a long way of me answering your question, but this is how you get to who your speaker is. You get to it by determining what's the problem you're going to solve. What are solutions they need? Who can then give this solution? If you want to take it one step higher, we actually create our summits with what we call as a summit story. So we actually want to be, we call them binge worthy. We think of like Netflix. Like when you watch Netflix, all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, I just binged 3 episodes.
Yeah.
Okay. So the problem with current summits is they're educational, but they're not that interesting. If you think of like TED Talks, interesting and educational. So we want to create our summits to be educational and entertaining, or what I like to call edutainment. So now that we know what the session is, we need to identify what the purpose, what's the one purpose? Because remember, we're trying to keep it tangible, bite-sizable, snackable content, right? So we got a one-day summit, minimal amounts of information, but we also want one specific purpose of that session. Now that you have that purpose, that will clearly let you know what speakers you should reach out to. And here's the beauty of that is when you reach out to a speaker about their zone of genius and you have a pretty specific thing that they can and want to talk about, the odds of them saying yes are much, much higher. Right. So a long way to answer your question, but I think it was important to go through those steps.
No, I think that was great. And I'm actually I'm gonna step out everything that Mark just went through in the show notes of the podcast. That way you can really drill down exactly what he just said. And it totally makes sense to you. But I want to just take a second to really hone in on what you just said, because if I said, hey, Mark, help me, I'm going to create a summit. I'm going to do it something so specific that is how to never run out of content for your podcast, as opposed to how to start a podcast, which is, I think, what a lot of people like, especially when they're podcasting, they want to get so general on what they're talking about. And I'm like, yeah, but if you get more specific, like, have you always done it this way? I guess that's my question. Like, have you done summits where they've been more general and they haven't been as successful, or have you always had this like kind of super niche approach to it?
Well, no, I've not always been successful. I like to look at myself as a student of the game. So I never say I'm an expert here. I mean, I've done a lot of great things, but the fact that I'm a student of the game also allows me to continue to learn and stay kind of ahead of the game, which is the whole reason for my podcast, right? I want to interview people who are doing different things to give me ideas as well. Now, I will say one of my kind of superpowers is branding and tactical wording of things. And I really, when I break that down, it's the ability to identify what problem does my audience have. Mm-hmm. So I've in the past have had the ability to identify problems and put those in a way that made them very interesting to people. So we've always had pretty high conversions and success on our summits, but just like anybody, I've had a handful of summits that have not converted. And the good thing is with a summit, and especially with a one-day summit, if we go back to that, like this is, and I love multi-day summits. We, like I said, 2 to 4 days. So I hope it doesn't sound like I'm bashing multi-day summits. My thing is, I want audience to be as successful as possible as soon as possible. Right. And one-day summits are much more forgiving. If you do a multi-day summit, which I highly recommend everybody does, but start with a little bit of experience with a one-day summit. But if you do a multi-day summit and you miss the mark, you're literally putting 4 to 6 months of time in. You've asked 20 to 80 speakers, and they're not going to turn around and say yes to another summit right after that. But with a one-day summit, 30 to 60 days, 5 to 10 speakers, let's say worst case scenario, it doesn't hit the mark. It doesn't convert. I mean, that sucks, right? But here's the other thing is you're only out 30 or 60 days. You've learned something. And so worst case scenario, you just do another one with that information. You create a whole new one and move forward. However, because of things like the virtual summit software, actually what you can do is you can go back to this exact same summit, take what you've learned, make simple tweaks, whether it's the copy, maybe it was the marketing. You can do what we call a relaunch or a legacy summit, either one of those, reach back out to your speakers and then actually do a relaunch of that summit to then correct what didn't work and make it successful. So don't be too afraid of like, well, I don't want to do it because if something goes wrong, it's not going to work and I'm out all that time. Like, doesn't matter kind of what happens, like you're still going to get success. And here's the other thing is anybody that I've ever talked to has ran a summit and let's say the summit bombed. They still got so much exposure from it and they got so many opportunities from it that they were all still glad that they ran the summit. They're like, yeah, I wanted to generate 10,000 leads, but I'll settle with 2,000 leads and the fact that I'm now speaking on a different person's podcast every other day or something like that.
Right. No, it's so good. And it's such valuable information because you're making me think totally different about summits because I have only been a participant in summits, and I've seen so many more in the last year now that I'm just aware that they're out there. And it's such a cool thing to see and to be a part of. So I want to know from your perspective, having done this for a long time, so many of our listeners are people who have an expertise in something. And maybe they're just getting started with a podcast or they're transitioning from a blog or YouTube channel, or they're trying to repurpose their content. We have just a wide range of entrepreneurs that are trying to figure out the online space and how they can best fit into it. So who would be the ideal person to host an online summit? So this is kind of like a two-part question. Who would be the ideal person to host one? And then if someone was looking to be a part of a virtual summit, how would they go about that?
Great question. So when it comes to hosting a virtual summit, what the easy answer would be like, well, anybody could host a virtual summit, like for all those benefits we just talked about.
Right.
I like to focus more, for me at this stage in my game, my career, I'm focused on helping people who have a message and who are trying to make an impact in the world. So I like to phrase it around, if you have a message that you feel like the world needs to hear, because we don't need more content. We don't need more summits just out there for the summit's sake.
Right.
If you have a message that you know an audience needs to hear and it's going to make an impact in their life, a difference in their life, then you should host a summit. Matter of fact, you should have a summit, you should have a podcast, you should have a YouTube channel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now you go, Mark, no, and I'm overwhelmed, right? But here's the beauty of it too. Like, let's say you're starting from ground zero, you have nothing. If you host a summit, you immediately have everything. Like, my whole content strategy for my entire year is one summit. If I host a 20 or 30 person summit, that's 20 or 30 different videos that I can leak out over weekly on my YouTube channel. I can take that audio and have it edited and put it into a podcast. I can then take that audio and put it through Rev, and I have a transcript, which I now use for show notes for that audio, and I use as a blog. And then I have my social media editor go through and take snippets and clips, and that's my social media content for the whole year. So like if we're going back to your whole, the problem of the summit we're just solving over here, a summit is the solution to that problem. But I will say this, it does come down to like who has a difference to make in the world. Because like I was just saying, we don't need more summits, but we do need people who are trying to make a difference. And I honestly believe every person has an impact to make in the world. You just need a little help finding either what that is and then getting it out to the world. So for all of you listening out there, like if you have that message, and here's the key to this. Maybe somebody's thinking, well, Mark, I teach Facebook ads. Like what kind of difference am I? Or maybe I teach, how to set up a messenger bot, or maybe I just run messenger bots. Every single position, every single person has an impact. Like what is that messenger bot doing for the person you're building it for? Who are they able to target? In my business, my summits, and across all of my business, actually, we have a KPI. It's lives changed. Now, depending on the summit we do, that changes. Like in my healthcare company, which is still there, we still rock it. We're still the leader in our industry and niche. We look at it as how many emails or messages do we get back that say you've changed my life. Yeah. But in my software company, we look at people who say you've changed my business or you've changed my ability to serve people. So for us, a KPI, a key performance indicator for us, is lives changed or impacted. That's like how seriously we are about that.
I love it. I love it because that to me just speaks to every message for me behind a podcast too. It's the same thing. It's like, a lot of people are like, well, you teach podcasting. And I'm like, yeah, but do you know how many people I have students and clients that are teaching mindfulness for yoga and meditation and how to run nonprofit organizations? Like, there's so many amazing messages out there. So listeners, we are speaking directly to you, because if you're interested in having a podcast, if you're interested in having an online business whatsoever, you have a message to share. And as Mark was saying, if you think it's very surface level, like Facebook ads or just what you do, then you got a little, like, this is your homework. You need to go and write down your why for why you're actually doing this. And I promise you, it can just blow your mind.
And if you think of it like that, like, again, it started for us with summits, but then I was like, this is such an important concept that we've put it into all of our business as a key KPI. If you actually start anything you're about to create, whether it's a course, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a promotional campaign, email copy, launch, whatever, with how can I ensure that I'm going to get messages back from this, that people have had their lives, their business, whatever changed. If you can do that and you start focusing on that, you're going to create better outcomes. You're going to create better content, courses, podcasts, etc. And then you're actually going to start to change people's lives. You're going to change their businesses. And when you do that, your business is going to skyrocket.
Oh, that's so awesome. Well, I so appreciate everything you've shared with us today, Mark. And I have a few rapid fire questions that we ask all of our guests. So are you up for that?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. So my first one, and this is the one I always find most interesting. Since you have a podcast, who is your dream podcast guest?
So my dream podcast guest is somebody who is in the virtual summit space. So we either host, speaker, coach, or consultant, or even marketer that has had some success and is willing to be vulnerable and transparent to talk about the good, the bad, and the beneficial around their experience with summits.
Okay, that's awesome. So if you're listening and you want to be on Mark's podcast, he just told you exactly how to get on his podcast. But the other question I have is, what advice, and we've kind of covered a little bit of this, but what advice would you give to someone who is not only a brand new podcaster, but they're just brand new to the online space and they're ready to pull their hair out and they have no idea what they're doing and they're just kind of in the thick of it? What advice would you give to them?
If you're just getting started or even at the beginning, the most powerful thing you can do is to niche down. Okay. You have to pick a niche. Like we say this, and maybe it's a rite of passage. Everybody has to make the mistake, because I know I made this mistake. All of my friends have made the mistake. It's almost like you got to get, knocked down a few times before you figure it out. But if you can take this information I'm telling you right now and niche down, whatever it is you want to be the expert in, whatever it is like you want to change the world at, pick a specific area, a specific niche. You're going to grow so much faster. It's like being more potent, right? The more potent you are, the faster you can expand, the faster people are going to find out about you. And then along with that, not only niching down is, I think this is more like something not to do, is don't try and build things out before you have an audience. I see far too often people spend weeks, months, even multiple months trying to build something out to sell or offer, whether it's a course or a program, to turn around and not have anybody to sell it to. Your number one thing right now is solve a problem, build a relationship. If you can niche down and solve a problem, build a relationship, you will build an engaged and qualified audience that will buy whatever you want to give to them. And in my opinion, one of the best ways to solve a problem, build an audience, is with a summit.
Oh, so good. Mark, thank you so much for sharing all of your valuable information today. Like I said earlier in the episode, we actually worked together recently for a summit that's coming up. So can you tell us a little bit about what's going on and also where everyone can find you?
So we got the Influencer Summit series, the podcast edition, getting ready to rock and roll. So you can check that out. We'll put links to that over in the show notes, or you can just Google Influencer Summit series podcast edition. I hang out. If you're interested in the software, you can definitely check that out over at Virtual Summit Software. We got tons of resources there, everything from a one-day summit starter guide, so you can figure that out if you're looking at jumping into that, to even some interview training, which is super powerful. But if you want to just hang out with me and follow me out, you can check out my Instagram. It's not just business. I travel around. You can see me hanging out at the beach here in Puerto Rico, and occasionally some business nuggets too. That's Hustle and Scale. So Instagram over at Hustle and Scale. That's my personal brand.
Okay, awesome. Well, like I said, Mark, thank you so much for sharing all of your valuable information about virtual summits, because you kind of blew my mind today. And I'm going to have to go back and listen to this just to write down all the nuggets of wisdom that I got, because it was just so awesome. So thank you so much again.
It was my pleasure. And I'll just leave you all with this. Please know you have a message that matters and an impact that you need to leave in the world. You just need a little help getting it out there.
Thank you so much, Mark. Y'all, that interview was so good. It was so good. And I can't wait for you to check out the Influencer Summit, because it's going to be so amazing. I feel so honored and so blessed that Dr. Mark invited me to be part of the summit, because guys, this is a really big deal. Being able to get out in front of people that I would otherwise never, ever in a million years be able to be associated with unless my following grew exponentially overnight, which I don't know about y'all, but that has not been the case for me. I have not exploded my audience just by waking up one day and saying, oh, I posted on Instagram once and now I am an overnight success. No, that's not how it happens. How you grow your audience and how you make a bigger impact is getting in front of more people. So I'm so excited about this Influencer Series Summit, and I'm just go check out the show notes, and all the information about Dr. Mark is there. So if you are interested in hosting your own virtual summits, I highly encourage you to go check out what he has to offer, because being a part of his summit, oh my gosh, the process was so easy, and we chatted about the early days of doing all this and like patchworking it on WordPress sites and hoping everything worked out, and sometimes it did and sometimes no. The whole process that I had, the entire process of being part of this with Dr. Mark was seamless. It was so easy. It was so professional and very clean looking. I don't know about you, but in 2019, our standards are pretty high when it comes to doing something online, and we want it to be easy. We don't want it to be fidgety. We don't want it to take forever and be like, oh, it's buffering for nobody has patience for that. His software was awesome. It was so awesome. So if you are thinking about launching your podcast and you're like, I don't even know, how I want to get this thing off the ground, then I encourage you to look at this as an opportunity. This wasn't even on my radar when I launched my podcast. And to know that I can offer this to you if you're just getting started, or you have already launched and you're like, I really want to get this thing out in front of more people, take this episode as something that you can go back and listen to over and over again. And I encourage you to think about hosting a virtual summit. I know I am. I'm already thinking about it for 2020. After my interview with Dr. Mark, we got off the call and he was like, hey, is there anything else I can help you with? And I'm like, I think I'm ready for a summit. Like, do you have any other suggestions for me? And he was like, basically like, well, just go back and listen to the conversation we just had. And I was like, okay, yeah, duh, Crystal, come on. So I went back and I listened to it whenever I was editing this episode, and it's just so many great nuggets of wisdom. So I'm thinking about it for 2020, and I hope that you are too. But that does it for this episode. So if this is your first time tuning in, thank you so much for being here to hang out with us. I encourage you to hop on over wherever you're listening to this podcast and leaving us a rating and a review and sharing it on social media. Tag me. I'm at Crystal Profit TX. Crystal with a K, Profit with 2 F's and 2 T's, and TX like the state of Texas. Yes, I know, we are very proud here, and that's just what I have to roll with. But you can check out all the information for the Influencer Summit on the website. crystalprofit.com/episode 102 is where you're going to find all the information about virtual summits and the Influencer Series Summit, as well as Dr. Mark and his virtual summit software, which, like I said, I highly recommend you go check it out. But that's all I have for you today. So Go check out the show notes. Make sure that you sign up for the free 5-day podcast bootcamp if you have not already done so, because it's pretty amazing. And while we're at it, I wanted to tell you that I have an upcoming masterclass that the registration is going to be opening very soon. It's all about 3 strategies that you can use to fill your 2020 podcast calendar for the first 6 months. Like, how amazing does that sound? You can go into 2020 with the first 6 months of your calendar already built out. There's no more sitting down and saying, what am I supposed to talk about this week? What am I going to talk about next week? There's no more of that. No, we're going to sit down and plan out 6 months of content for 2020 in one masterclass. So stay tuned. There's going to be some more information about that very shortly, but I wanted to just drop that in your ear. That way you're thinking about it now. So that's all I have for you today. So remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.